This video is sponsored by rereads. They seriously skew your stats. Hello my lovely friends, it's Margaret, and today I am coming at you with my September wrap-up. So we're gonna buzz through this because I don't have a lot of memory left on my camera card. I need a new one. I know, it's a problem. We'll get there. A side note, I already did a dedicated Vaultathon wrap-up, so I will mention those books, but I'm not going to go into detail on them. If you're interested in more of my thoughts for what I read for Vaultathon, just check up here. I will have it linked in the top. Okay, so in the month of September, I read 11 books. 4 of those were rereads, and they were all 4 rereads of books that I absolutely adore. So just like when you look at how many 5-star books I have this month, just please keep that in mind. I was already rereading books that I have given 5 stars to previously. Seriously, skewing my stats. I read 5.5 physical books and 6.5 audiobooks. The reason the half is there is because I was going back and forth on one of those books between the audiobook and the physical book, reading them. So I ended up reading 3 sci-fi, 5 fantasy, and 3 contemporary books. I read 1 adult book, 1 middle grade, and then all of the other ones were YA. And then I had 7 5-star books, 3 4-star books, and 1 3-star book. As usual, I will go by the format that I read the book, and I will start out with the audiobook. The first audiobook that I read was Defy the Stars by Claudia Gray. I gave this 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a fantastic, fun sci-fi. I really liked how much she was able to do with a narrative that only revolved around 2 characters for the most part. We only saw other characters like here or there, so most of it was revolving around these 2 characters, and yet she's kept the plot interesting. She kept it moving. I was really impressed with that. Plus, I really like the romance, and I like where it's going, so I can't wait to get to the second book. This is about Abel and Noemi lives on the planet of Genesis, and Genesis has separated itself from Earth because Earth has just consumed all of the resources, and Genesis believes that we should be more careful with our planets, that we should take more care with our resources. So that's their philosophy, and they've been at war with Earth for a very long time, trying to keep Earth from taking over their planet because Earth has run out of resources, basically. Abel is part android, part human. Think Data from Star Trek. Like, that's what he reminded me of. He has been in stasis for 30 years, trapped in this spaceship. Noemi ends up stumbling upon his spaceship and finding him, and she discovers that he might have the key to winning the war between Genesis and Earth. If you are looking for more of a soft sci-fi that is more about the plot than it is about the world and the technology, this would be a great book for you. Speaking of soft sci-fi, the next book that I finished was the final book in the Lunar Chronicles, Winter by Marissa Meyer. Obviously, I can't tell you too much about this, but the series starts off with Cinder. The way Marissa Meyer has intertwined the plots of all 4 books. Each book you get a new set of characters to interact with, and it's just like their plots all are so intertwined. Like, starting out, you're gonna be like, how are they going to tell this story with 4 different protagonists? But at the end of the series, you're like, okay, this is why she did this way. Like, it was so well done, well crafted, well thought out. Like, I don't know how many other words I can tell you besides the fact that like everything in this series happened for a reason, and I'm just like, wow. Like, things that I was like, oh, this is an interesting thing to have added to the plot end up being extremely important in this course of the series, and I just, like, I was screaming when we got to the point. Well, I can't tell you what point that was because that's a spoiler, but like there was a point here where I was like, so that's how everything fits together. And I lost it. This series has taken over my life. I need to read the short story collection. I need to read the graphic novels. I love it. I ended up giving this book 5 stars. The next book that I finished was Enchantée by Guida Trellis. I ended up giving this 3 stars. It was enjoyable, but it was not quite like I still had some issues with kind of how it resolved, honestly, is what it came down to in the end. If you want more of my thoughts, again, I will have the vlog linked in the description box. The next audiobook that I finished was also one for Vaultathon, and that was There's Something About Sweet by Sundaya Manon. I ended up giving this 5 stars. I absolutely adored it. It was exactly the light, fluffy contemporary that I needed at the time. I will definitely be doing a full review on this because I just love Sundaya Manon's writing, and she has secured a place on my favorite shelf. That's all I have to say about that. And the final audiobook that I finished in the month of September was Howls Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. This was a reread. I love this series. I just happened to get it from the library, and it's fantastic. It's great. I will say I wasn't a particular fan of the narrator. I felt like she was maybe a little bit too old for the characters, but that's fine. It was still a great story. This is about Sophie, and Sophie is the eldest of 3 sisters. And in the land of Ingary, everyone knows that the eldest of 3 sisters is the one that is most destined to fail. Sophie is not at all surprised when she ends up getting magically turned into an old woman. She kind of accepts it. So she decides that the best thing she can do is just go off into the countryside and never see any of her family again. I know, dramatic. And as she is going off in the countryside, she ends up coming across the castle of the wizard Howl. Now, Howl has a bit of a reputation in her little town of Market Chipping. He is known for capturing young women and eating their hearts. And Sophie figures that since she is actually an old woman now, she'll be fine. So she ends up being taken on as Howl's housekeeper, and everything goes from there. This is such a great book because it is so, like, there's so much girl power in this book, and I absolutely adore it. Like, every time I read this, I find a new level to the different female characters, because Diana Wynne Jones, if there's one thing she does really well, it is female characters, it is world building, it is such a fun romance. I mean, it's a disaster of a romance, but it is also so fun. It's like that true old school, like, they hate each other until they don't kind of thing going on in this fantasy. I just love it. And if that's not enough, go look up the chapter titles online. The chapter titles are magnificent, and I love them. So that finishes all of the audiobooks that I read in September. And the first physical book I read in September was The 10,000 Drawers of January by Alex E. Harrow. This is about January Scholar, and she is a young woman growing up in 1901 Vermont. She's under the guardianship of a gentleman named Mr. Locke because her dad does a lot of traveling for his job. He actually works for Locke. He is quite often away from home. Someone needed to take care of January, so his employer ended up raising her kind of as his own daughter. And when she is 17, she ends up finding this book called The 10,000 Doors. And in it, someone is defending the existence of doors that lead to other worlds. This was so much fun. I really, really enjoyed it. I actually have a full review if you're interested. I will have it linked up top in the card. Now, this is a dual narrative, so it did take me a minute to really get into it because I was a little confused as to why we had this suddenly where we were having chapters from the book that January was reading. But those chapters actually end up being really interesting and really important. So just know that, like, you're gonna want to know what's going on with both stories. I thought that the world building in this was fantastic. It is a portal fantasy. It's kind of been sold as something where she's hopping in and out of portals during the entire book, and that is not what's happening. We definitely have to build up to the point where she figures out how to be able to go in and out of portals. So you don't see as much of other worlds as I think people have assumed, but still what we do see, it's really interesting. She gives you such a great, like, snapshot of each world. We don't necessarily spend a lot of time in each of them, but we know what the people are like. We know what the world is like. I really liked it. I thought it was really well done. I ended up giving this 4 stars. The next book that I finished was Asaph Fools by Amanda Foody. Whoo! This book threw me for a... This is about In, and In's mother has disappeared. She's gone to this city called New Rains. In never saw herself going to New Rains because it's not exactly the most reputable of cities. Think like an old school Las Vegas type feel, but In's mother has disappeared. And she sent in this ominous letter that says, if I do not return home, go find Levi Glazier, and he will be able to, like, he'll help you find me, basically. So In goes to find this Levi person and figure out what has happened to her mother. This was such a good book. I enjoyed it so much. Like, it took me a few minutes to get into it, but once I was in it, I was in it. Like, this world just grabs you and drags you in. These characters, you sympathize with them. You want everything to be okay for them. Like, you feel like they are real people who are, like, living through a historical time period. And it's also such an interesting, like, kind of steampunk mashup of old school and, like, more modern times. Like, a lot of what they wear sounds very Victorian, but at the same time, like, because they're in New Rains, things get a little loose, a little bit more flamboyant than you might have had in Victorian times. I had so much fun reading this book. I love the characters. I love the world building. It is frustrating as heck at the ending because the things I wanted to happen hadn't happened, and I don't know that they're going to happen in book 2, but I'm going to read it anyways, even though I know I'll regret it. I ended up giving Ace of Shades 4 stars, and I also have a full review for this book coming at some point soon. The next book I finished was the group book for Vaultathon, and that is Renegades by Marissa Meyer. I ended up giving this 5 stars. It is a reread. I love this book. I love how she does the characters and the superheroes, and if you want to hear more of me, like, ranting about it, again, you have my vlog. The next book was also a Vaultathon read, and that's I Tell You I Love You, But Then I'd Have to Kill You by Ellie Carter. I love this series. It is one of my favorite series from the time I was young. I mean, I'm still technically young, but, like, this is from when I was a baby Margaret in college. This was so much fun to reread. I really enjoyed it, and I really it is my favorite Ellie Carter series. Like, without a doubt, it is my favorite. I love Heist Society, and I feel like Heist Society is more general audience. It's a little bit less high schooly, and I know that, like, sometimes the high school part can turn people off, but I still love this book. and this series so much, especially considering that as you go on further in the books, we get a little bit further from the high school setting just because of the way the plot goes, and things get a little bit darker. So if you're looking for that, you might want to stick it through for the next few books. The next book that I finished in September was the one that I was flipping back and forth between audiobook and physical book, and that is The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. This is the third time I've read it. If that tells you anything about how I feel about it, it's got 5 stars. This is about Jude Duarte, and unfortunately for Jude Duarte, before her mother married her father, she was married to a fairy lord. And so when she was 7, he came to claim his wife and child, only to find her shacked up with another man with 2 more kids. So he murdered both of them and took all of the children to raise in Fairy as his own. And so we pick up with Jude 10 years later as she is trying to find a solid place for herself in Fairy. She's trying to figure out, how do I survive this place that this is the only world she's ever known. It's the only world that she really feels comfortable in, but at the same time, she knows that she is very, very vulnerable as a mortal, and so this is just about her trying to get the power so that no one can hurt her. I love this series so much. I cannot wait for the last book. I was sort of buddy reading this with a friend because she's picked up the series, and we were rereading it because Queen of Nothing is coming soon, and I cannot wait for that. I love this series. I love how badass Jude is. I love that she's already like good at what she does. She still has a little bit of training that she has to do, but like she's already a kick-ass fighter, and she does a great job at it. She's good at that. She's good at the kicking and the punching, and she's not so good at the interpersonal relationships with everyone else. Especially not in the next book, but I love the world that Holly Black has created. I feel like it's very familiar. It's the typical fairy that you know. I love the characters. I love how complex they are, even the ones that you might not necessarily like, except for one character who I will not name because that is a spoiler, but they need to die. I don't care. Bye. They are awful. I will say the romance is one of the like it only works, it just barely squeaks by as something that works because it is kind of a bully romance, and because of the setup and because of what's going on, I can see it, I'm into it, it's okay with me. Just know that it is very intense and it is not everyone's cup of tea. I understand that. And the final book is one that I have not finished yet, but it is a reread, and I will be finished it by tomorrow, which is the last day of September, and that is Cross My Heart and Hope to Spy by Allie Carter. This is the sequel to the Gallagher Girls series. So this just picks up where the last book left off. Cammy is still in spy school, only this time she is in spy school and there are boys. Because of the events of the last book, her mother, who is the headmistress of the Gallagher Academy, decides that it might be beneficial to give the girls some exposure to boy spies before they have to go into the field. And so this is just about her school teaming up with another school to kind of do like a student exchange program, which is fantastic because one of the boys happens to like be into Cammy, and this is not something she's used to because she is what's known as a pavement artist, which means she's really good at blending in and not being seen, and yet here is this boy who sees her. This keeps happening to her and it's really awkward. I love this series. I love Cammy. I love Bex and Liz and all of the characters. Like, just, you have an entire school of badass spy girls, and I'm here for it. I love how Allie Carter is able to keep a light, fun tone to this series, but also still delve into some of the deeper topics. One of the things she really explores through this series is grief, because Cammy has lost her dad on a mission a few years ago, and so both she and her mother are grappling with that and grappling with how do you move on when this tragic event has happened to you. I love it. It is so good. Those are all of the books that I read in September. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already subscribed. I make videos about books and writing 2 to 3 times a week, and I would love to see your lovely face here on a regular basis. That is it, my friends. Happy reading, and I will see you later when we will talk about more wordy, nerdy things. Bye! And that's eating out. Okay. And the first physical book I read in September